Hello, welcome to Pizza Making with Ben. Today I'll be helping you get started with how to make my pizza dough recipe. The way I started making pizza dough was through this book from Ken Forkish called The Elements of Pizza. So a lot of the techniques that we'll be going over are basically the 24-hour to 48-hour method that he goes over in this book. However, I use a very different recipe in terms of the ingredients and the ratios that I put into my dough. So in terms of ingredients, what we'll need are about 323 grams of water warmed to 90 to 95 degrees. You can start by just dumping that right into your bowl or your bucket over here like this. And then what we're going to do is add salt. In this case, we use a sea salt. You could also get by with a kosher salt, but what you do not want to do is use an iodized salt. Iodized salt will actually inhibit the fermentation of the yeast and give you a very, very bad rise if you get one at all from your dough. So what we're going to do here is add 16 grams of sea salt, dump it right in our warm water, and give it a little swish to dissolve. Just twirl it around for a while until you can see, most of the salt is completely dissolved. Should take about 30 seconds or so. And then once you're ready, you can start moving on to your instant dry yeast. So what we'll need to do now is basically take the dry yeast, activate it in the warm water so it'll be nice and ready to ferment. For this recipe, we'll be using about 1.3 grams of instant dry yeast, which is pretty impossible to weigh on a scale that's not that accurate. So all that is about 2/3 of 1/2 of a teaspoon of yeast. So let's get my half teaspoon here. Eyeball about 2/3, drop it in, give a nice little swish, and similarly, we'll just kind of swish that around until the yeast has dissolved. If you actually get your nose in there, you'll be able to smell that yeast start to activate and kind of have a little bit of a brewery type smell going on. So the next ingredient I'll be adding is the flour, which is one of the most important ingredients. And one of the areas where I actually differ from what Ken does is Ken believes you should try to mimic Neapolitan pizza that you'll find in Italy. And to do that, you'll be using Italian 00 flour. The issue with the 00 flour is in order to really bake it well, you need to have a commercial oven or wood fire oven that's going to get to about 800 to 1,000 degrees and bake that pizza in like 1 minute. Because most of us are not blessed with ovens that get that hot, what we should actually be using is a bread flour. The reason why you want to use a bread flour is because it's a higher protein content, which is going to be better for baking in a conventional oven. As you can see with King Arthur, they have about a 12.7% protein here versus their all-purpose, which is an 11.7. If you use a 00 or a 00 Italian flour, you're probably going to get closer to 11%. So you really do get a much higher protein content from your bread flour. So once we have a nice mixture here, or a nice dissolved mixture of salt and yeast here, you can really smell the yeast active now. You can then just dump in your 530 grams of bread flour. And with this recipe, you don't need to use a mixer of any kind. There's actually very little arm work. I know people are sometimes nervous of having to knead so much. This is actually very simple to do. So I need to come over here to a closer look, and we can see what this looks like. At this point, all we're going to do is just kind of mix this by hand until it is completely incorporated. So you can just kind of get your hand in there, spin it around for a bit, and you'll see it slowly clump together until it gets into this kind of almost kind of like a clay-like mixture. And this is where you might need to start, actually pinching it together to get those clumps all incorporated. You'll have some loose flour at the bottom, and just keep working it like that. The other area where I sort of differ from Ken's book, where I got started, is he does higher hydration pizza, about 70%. What that basically means is for the weight that is the flour, you add 70% of that weight in water. Mine here is closer to like 60 or 61%. So let's get that all mixed up like that. Just kind of push it in the corners if you have to get it incorporated. I need to just kind of scrape it up from the bottom. Yes, and the more challenging thing about sort of the lower hydration is that it is harder at this first step to kind of get it all incorporated, but it's actually going to be a lot easier to work with later on down the road than a higher hydration wet dough. So this is looking pretty good. So once we have it all incorporated for the most part like that, we'll be ready to let it rest. But one method that I do like is what we call the pincer method, where you can kind of pinch the dough together several times, kind of grip it in the middle, let it stretch out, fold it over on itself, squish it down, do that again. That kind of helps you just kind of get a nice mix. So once we get to a state like this, we are pretty much all incorporated. And what we can do now is let this rest covered for about 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, we'll come by and do some more kneading, but until then, I will see you later.